Hi everyone, my name is Phil and welcome to Phil Does 3D. I'm a multimedia and 3D artist and I stream on Twitch weekdays from 5 PM Pacific time in the United States, 12 PM in Australia and 1 AM in the UK. Hopefully you guys can see me. I know Twitch is still having some problems with showing channels when they go live. Obviously, if you can't see me, you won't know, but I typed into chat, if you're having a problem with the stream going live, then refresh your browser page a few times and eventually it will come up as being live. So anyone not seeing the stream, it's not going to help you, I guess, but anyone that is, and if you have this problem with any streamers you watch, just keep refreshing your browser. Eventually, the channel will go live for you. I just want to briefly talk about the start times. My start times never change. I always stream on a Monday, a Tuesday and a Wednesday at 5 PM. That's Pacific time at the moment in the United States. Now, daylight saving starts for you guys in the US on the 12th, so next week. So my start time never changes for you guys in the United States. It will always be 5 PM Pacific daylight time when that starts. But for you guys that are around the world and aren't in the US, that's going to mean that my start time is going to be pushed back by an hour. So in Australia, for instance, instead of starting at 12 PM, I'm going to be starting at 11 AM. And if you're in the UK, instead of me starting at 1 AM, it's going to be midnight. And that's until you guys in the UK start your daylight savings. Because we actually finish daylight savings here in Australia. So it even gets pushed back earlier for me here, but we won't worry about that. I'll keep reminding you guys today, tomorrow and Wednesday. But anyone in the US, my schedule doesn't change. It'll always be 5 PM in Pacific time in your time zone. It'll just change a little bit for you guys that aren't in the United States. I'll keep reminding you though, like I said, each day this week, and because next week the new time will kick in. So just be aware, if you're not in the US, my start time for you guys is going to be pushed an hour earlier. But if you're in the United States, like I said, it's going to be 5 PM, always 5 PM. On Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I just thought I'd remind you guys about that because of the daylight savings. It's going to be starting in the United States, and I know it starts in the UK, I think at the end of March, around the 26th, but we'll tackle that then. But until then, remember I'm going to be starting an hour earlier if you are not in the United States. So I wanted to briefly also talk about Gnarled. Now I know Sniper Echo uses it, which is great because it's a great program. It's a program that you use to create normal maps and occlusion maps and that type of thing from textures. I like it because you can load in a mesh and view the mesh while you're adjusting your normal map, so you see it live in real time, and the adjustments are very quick. I mean, I've used bitmap to material like I tell you guys, but I find that a bit slow to use sometimes when you change your settings on your normal map. Whereas Gnarled, it's always very quick. So that's the reason I like to use Gnarled. That and the fact I can see my mesh. But Sniper Echo was talking about a problem he was having with the axes. So if it's not a Z up axis, your model's going to come in sideways, and usually the only way to fix that is to export your model and change your axes to Y up. But there is actually a setting in Gnarled if you go into Preferences, and then under where are we? Here, under 3D Preview, you can change your mesh axis so that Y is up. And that way when you bring a model in from, say, Maya or Blender, it'll be up the right way. It won't be laid on its side. So if you're working in Max, that's usually not a problem because Z up is the axis in Max. But Maya and Blender have Y up, and if you're exporting models to bring into the Unreal Engine, it's Y up as well. So you want to change it here. So just go into Preferences, 3D Preview, and then you can change your mesh axes so that Y is up. So just for you guys that are importing your models and wondering why they're laying sideways and not the right way up, change it there. You won't have to change anything in your export. You can keep everything the way it is, but just change it in the program here. I'll be using Gnarled while I'm using creating these models for the Art Deco entrance that we're creating. Again, for anyone new to the channel, we're recreating an Art Deco building that I made in UDK in 2011. We're going to be remaking that in the Unreal Engine 4.15. So let's just pull up our working file here. Yeah, I know. I had a feeling Sniper Echo says you're kidding me. Because we were talking about this a few weeks ago because he purchased the program. About this problem he was having, and I thought there was a setting in Null, but I couldn't quite remember where it was. So I went through the program the other day because, like I said, I'm going to be using it for the Unreal Engine for some of these textures. Some of the textures we're going to be doing in Substance Painter, and some of them are going to be doing in Mari by the Foundry. But I still like to use Null to do occlusion maps and normal maps and things like that. So yeah, that's where the setting's hiding under preferences, dude. I knew it was there. I had a feeling, I remembered something about it being in there. I just couldn't find it the other day when we were talking about it. So yeah, if you're using Null, change your preferences in there. Which I'd have to do as well because I'm exporting these models to go into the Unreal Engine. And in the Unreal Engine, Y axis is up as well, as opposed to max here where Z is up. And if I was bringing my models into Null, they would have been flipped on their side as well. And like I said to Sniper Echo, it's not a big deal, but it's nice if you can have your model up the right way. So we'll be changing it when we bring models into do our normal maps in Null as well. So last week we were working on this Art Deco sconce here, wall light. Yeah, it's hidden away there in the preferences. It's easy to miss. I didn't see it at first either when I was looking through them, but like I said, I remembered there was a setting in there, so I made sure the other day that I went through the program line by line to find it, and that's where it is. Let's open up Unreal. I actually forgot to open that up. I've got everything else open, but didn't open up Unreal. So let's do that now. And remember guys, Epic Games Unreal Engine is completely free to download and use, so I encourage you guys to download it and play around with it. Like I said, one of the reasons I'm on Twitch is not to show you just my work, but to encourage you guys to do 3D yourselves because it's a fun thing to do. You know, it's a really enjoyable thing to play around with. So I encourage you to download the Epic Games engine, install it and play around with it. Like I said, it's free. If you want to create something commercially, then you pay a 5% sales fee to Epic Games on whatever you sell. But if you're not releasing anything commercially, then there's never anything to pay to Epic Games, so. I've just got a basic project started in Unreal, which is just the Art Deco building. What we're doing is we're just gradually importing the assets as we work on them in Max. So by the time we get to the last asset in Max, we will have all of our assets ready to start rebuilding that Art Deco building in the Unreal Engine. So that's why I'm opening up Unreal, even though there's nothing in the scene. We're just gradually importing our assets as we work on them, so that by the time we're finished, we get to our last asset in Max that I want to upgrade a few of them, make the textures, change some of the textures, make some of the meshes a little bit higher detail. Because these meshes I created back in 2011, so they need an update. They're looking a bit old. And then once we get to the last asset in Max, like I said, as we go we import them into Unreal, then we can just start jumping straight into Unreal and rebuilding the Art Deco building interior. I'm just a bit slow here because I've got Max open, Substance Painter open, Mari is open, Null is open, Photoshop is open. So I've got quite a bit going on in the background for my PC here to handle. And that's just because I don't know which program I'm going to jump into next. Like I was explaining to you guys, when I've worked for game studios in the past, anyone that's not familiar with me or what I do, you can go to my web page and read up a bit more about me there. But generally when I work, I have my 3D program open, my painting program open, Photoshop is open. The game editor that I'm using is generally open. So let's just look at some of our assets here. We have our air intakes here. Now these are just the ones that sit on the side of the building. Let's just jump back into Max quickly so I can show you where they are. So they are these bits here that sit on the side of the building. They just circulate air between the brick wall and the inner wall. They just run around the outside of the building here. So we have our air intakes. Yeah. Now the texturing for these was done in Substance Painter. We've just got 3 different versions. We've got a cleaner version, a medium version, and then a really worn version. It's this one here. And last week, at the end of the stream last week, we were working on this Art Deco wall sconce, and that's what this is here. And all we did there was we added an emissive map in the material to simulate the light glow. And what we will be doing when we bring this into the engine to actually start setting it up is we're going to put a light source in front of this to cast light back on these decorative pieces that we created. We're also going to be placing a light bulb, a light source inside to cast light up along the wall that they sit on. So even though we're using an emissive map, you'll still need 2 light sources, one at the front to simulate light being cast on the front of the object here from the bulb behind it, and a light source behind it to cast light up along the wall. The only change I made from what you guys saw last week, if you recall last week, the whole front face of this light was glowing. I made one change in the material, which was, let me just open my materials up here. Here we are. This is the material for the emissive material for the light source itself. Now, let's just look at the material. This is the emissive material. Now, this is the material here that we're using for the texture map, and this is a different material I'm using for the emissive map. And that is, the material looks like this here. It's just basically, I painted it up in Photoshop. All I'm doing is using gradually darker, start with a yellow, move to a red, go to a darker red, then I go to a blue, and then I go to more of a grey-green. So that's what the emissive map looks like. That's the only change I made from what you guys saw last week. Because last week we were using the original texture map as the emissive map. Let me just go back to my... So yeah, last week we were using the texture map here as the emissive map, but I changed that to that updated emissive map. And all I did was pull up on the multiply value here and grew in the constant V value to 140 to bring up that glow. I did make one other change as well, which was just to push out the sides of the lamp here. And initially they were running straight back to the wall, and that was incorrect. I looked at the reference image again, and they should actually be pushed out a little. So they still push the light forward, but they're not sitting at a 90-degree angle like they were last week when we created it. I just rotated them out to more of a 45-degree angle. So that's the only change we've made here to the light, but our light here is finished now. I brought our texture map into Gnarled and made a normal map and an occlusion map as well. So we can move on to another asset to start working on today. Do remember, guys, if you have any questions or anything you're not sure about, please feel free to pop into chat and ask me. I'm happy to help if I can. I've worked in 3D for more than 10 years. I work in architectural visualization now, but I've worked in games development in the past. For a couple of game studios, I've made a few games, AAA games. Well, I've worked with others making some AAA games, I should say. Now we're going to choose what we're going to be working on next. Yeah, I thought it looked better as well, Sniper Echo. Sniper Echo saying it does look better with the changes. It was just before the light was looking too, the glow was all over. It was, it just didn't look quite right. This way it looks more like a bulb is actually in the middle of the light as opposed to the whole light glowing. Again though, once this actually goes inside the building on the wall, the glow should show up a little better. And once we get the light sources in place as well. And I think pulling out the sides also just helps to see more of the shape of the actual light itself. But I did just want to show you guys how I changed it and why I changed it, just in case anyone watching last week looks at this and thinks, well, that looks a bit different from what I saw last week. That's the reason. And they're the changes I made. We're going to decide what we're going to be working on next here. Now, you know, I should go in order, I guess, but I don't tend to like to work that way anyway, so we'll jump around. I remember the ones that I've done and which ones I haven't. Now, I like the texture on this wall panel, but the wall panel itself is very flat. So, I just want to add a bit more geometry, a bit more, yeah, a few more polys to this, so it's just not a flat plane. I want to give it more three-dimensionality, so we may work on this. Let's see what else we've got here. Some of the textures on these are okay, like, but others are really strange. Like, I don't know what I was thinking when I made this, because this wood is completely different color to the rest of it. It really should all be the same color, so we've got to fix that up. But some of the textures themselves, like this decorative piece along the bottom and through here, I want to keep that too, because it helps to tie in with the wall panels here. But let's see. I'm going to tackle that towards the end. I think that's quite a difficult thing to texture up. Actually, I think I want to try and actually use glass panels here, glass material in Unreal. So we'll tackle that a bit later. This is light. This is one of the ceiling lights. Let me just select it so Max doesn't jump all around the place on me. We could do this light. Again, we can add some more detail to this light. I'm just trying to think whether we should move on to something a bit different, because we did a light last week, so maybe give the light a break for this week and work on something else. These are outdoors. We're going to be using the two doors. This is for the front of the building and these are for the side of the building. Again, we probably leave the doors for now. Hey Alchemist, good to see you. Glad you can see the stream. I was worried that some people may not know that I'm live because Twitch is having problems. What are we going to work on? Let's work on this thing. I really hate this thing. The texturing, that is. It's awful. I did a really awful job texturing that up. Again, no excuses, guys. You know, this was done 6 years ago and not everything I do is gold, and it's really bad. Really badly textured. I do have a bit of geometry going on, which is good, I think. Yeah, I do. So I think let's retexture this monstrosity up, I think. Yeah, let's do that. We're going to keep the original texture. I'm going to completely cover it over anyway, so let me just go into isolation mode here. And make sure this is not a grouped object. I don't think it, no, but we'll leave it as an edit mesh. Like I say to you guys, I always tell you to work in edit poly, and if you're going to be making alterations to the geometry, do go back to edit poly. But if we're exporting this to go into a game engine, that's going to be working in mesh mode anyway. Game engines use triangles, they don't use polygons. So any mesh you export to go into a game engine is automatically going to be converted to tris. So keeping it as a mesh, if you're not going to be altering the object at all, is probably okay. And we're really only going to be changing the texturing on this, I think. Just going to have a look at my edges here. Yeah, again, our edges are really hard, and you know I hate that, but we're going into a game engine. I really don't want to. I want to try and keep the objects as light as possible, like as low poly as I can anyway. even though with game engines today and video cards, you can push things a bit higher than you used to be able to. We'll texture it up using the low poly, and if I feel that when we bring it into Unreal, it looks like a bit, those hard edges are really starting to annoy me, we can create a high-res version of the mesh and bake it out. But let's try texturing it first in Substance Painter, I think, and see how we go from there. Sniper Echo says, I don't believe Phil textured that piece. Yeah, no, Phil did. Phil textured this 6 years ago, and didn't Phil do a wonderful job? Oh dear. Yes. Not good, guys, not good at all. Oh well. I live and learn. Like I said, you know, a good example of you get better the longer you do something, and this is me from 6 years ago, so shows you just how bad some stuff can be. Just checking this to see what exactly is going on here. Okay. But we can fix it up. That's the whole point of us redoing this in Unreal version 4.15, and that's so we can fix all these mistakes, let's call them. Yeah. I may do this in 2 pieces, I think. So what I'm going to actually do is find my model here. Now again, for some reason, I'm noticing all of these model pieces are unwelded. All of the verts are not welded together for some reason, which is really odd. I don't know why that has happened. Yeah, I've just got to keep remembering that the vertices are not welded together. That's why selecting different parts of the model here is problematic. But I'm going to detach these pieces anyway at this stage. I might weld this together like I showed you guys last week. Generally you can't select every vert to do a weld because you're going to end up with like a big blob in the middle, but as long as you're careful you can weld together. So I might actually convert this to an edit poly, I think, before I do the weld. And again, just because I have more options with an edit poly. Let's open our weld dialog box here. You start by going all the way to 0 and you just keep pushing it up until things start to look a bit weird. So it's too high, back to 0. I'm going to pull in a bit here. I'm going to start pulling it up gradually. I'm going to pull in here and have a look at what it's doing. The difference between edit poly and edit object. Let me look at that in a minute. There isn't much of a difference, I don't think. The only difference, I think, is in some of the options you have available under Edit Poly as opposed to Edit Object, but I'll check that in just a sec. But they're both pretty much the same. I just want to see what's going on here. Okay, we can go up to 0.1 of a centimetre to get them to weld together. We know they're welding properly because we're getting our shadowing back. If we go too low, we see our shadows disappear, which means our welds aren't too far apart, so we've just got to pull it up a little bit more until we see our shadows pop back in. Okay, now let's have a look at this edit weld and edit poly. Sorry, edit poly and edit object. When you say edit object, what do you mean exactly? I don't see an edit object. Sniper Echo. Sniper Echo says, the only reason I ask is those terms are not used in Blender. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there is no edit object. An edit poly is just a polygonal mesh. I'm not sure what they call it in Blender. So you have an edit mesh, and a mesh is a triangular mesh, so triangles. Edit poly is a polygonal mesh, so it generally is made up of four-sided polygons, whereas an edit mesh is made up of three-sided triangles. That's the only difference between edit poly and edit mesh in Max. Or in any, I don't know, they'll call it different things in different 3D software. But basically it's just, one is a triangular mesh and one is a polygonal mesh, so either three-sided triangles or four-sided polys. That's really the only difference. And you can have an edit poly that's still a triangular mesh. It can get a bit confusing. Oh, you meant edit mesh, yeah. Edit mesh, edit poly. One is meant to work on triangular meshes, three-sided triangular meshes, and edit, which is edit mesh. Edit poly is meant to work on four-sided polygonal meshes, but you can work on either one, on either type of mesh. It gets a bit, like I said, a bit confusing. The only thing you really got to remember is it's really going to be dependent on the 3D software you're using, but most of them are going to offer you more options on an edit poly or whatever, a polygonal mesh, than they will on a triangular mesh. You're going to be able to alter it much more and have much more control. You'll have more options to work with on a polygonal mesh than a triangular mesh. And like I said, you can, that's even though one is meant to work with polygons and one is meant to work with triangles, you can use an edit poly on a triangular mesh in Max. So yeah, it can be a little confusing, but just remember, edit polygons are four-sided polygons, so square. Tris or triangles are a three-sided three-sided triangle, and all game engines work in triangles. They don't work in polygons. So even if you have a lovely, nice quad mesh, like nice quadified polygon mesh, as soon as you import that into a game engine, it's going to split it up into triangles, because game engines work in triangles, not polygons. A lot of designers now like to work in polygons because a lot of them, character designers for instance, they can get really nice edge loops with edit polys, which are very hard to do with a triangulated mesh. I don't do character work, so I'm less concerned with it, but yeah, most pardon me, most designers prefer to work in edit poly. And I suggest you work in edit poly when you can, because you'll get like I said, not only can you work in your edit poly mode here and have many more options, it's just an easier way to work in polygons as opposed to triangles. But I'm only saying, do be aware that when you export that model, that nice quadified mesh, that nice polygonal model, to take it into a game engine, it's going to be triangulated, because that's just the way it is. That's the way graphics cards work with data, with 3D data. They work on a triangulated mesh. But always work in polygon mode, usually in your 3D software. And only worry about going to triangles when you export it, but even then don't worry about it, because when you do an export as an FBX, it'll triangulate it for you, or Unreal will triangulate it when you import it. I'm assuming Unity is the same. I haven't used Unity, but it will work with triangles, and I'm assuming it will convert any polygon meshes to triangles when you import the object. So yeah, when working in 3D, work in edit poly, but just be aware that it's going to triangulate it when you import it into your game engine, whatever you're using, whether that's Unreal or Unity. So we have split that up, and I have I did do that, didn't I? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. I've triangulated, I've welded my verts here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. I'm going to jump into this top piece here and have a look at it. It looks like I may have grabbed a piece of the model here I didn't intend to. Just let me have a look. Again, this is because my model pieces here, all the vertices are split. They should all be welded, and I don't know why they're not welded together. They should be. Just going to go into wireframe mode here for a minute. Yeah, that's actually not part of what I want, so I'm just going to detach that. I'm going to select that piece. Where are you? Again, I'm going to convert it to another poly, and I'm just going to attach it to the outside section, which is where it should be attached anyway. And let's go back into shaded. So now I should just have this piece at the top. The reason I'm splitting this up is I'm going to work on just one part of it before I worry about the top part, texturing up one section before I worry about texturing the top. But I have a feeling we have to again convert this to a poly, edit poly, and I want to weld the verts together. Do remember though, you had to turn off ignore backfacing if you want to make a selection on everything. If I have that turned on and make a selection in my front viewport here, I'm not going to be selecting the vertices on the back. That's just for people that use Max. If you want to make sure you select all your verts, make sure that that's not ticked, ignore backfacing. So let's go into our weld dialog box here. We've remembered the setting from our last weld, so that should be fine for this one. Alright, let's grab this piece of geometry here. Again, I'm going to isolate that selection. Now, again, when you're exporting a model and to import it into the Unreal Engine, I'm not sure about Unity, but I know with the Unreal Engine, Unreal doesn't pays no attention to your axis position in Max. It all works on world position. So if you want to make sure that it's easy for you to move your model piece around when you import it into Unreal, make sure that you move that piece of geometry to the 0, 0, 0 world coordinates, because that'll be the middle of the object when you bring it into Unreal. I'm just moving it to the 0 position in all of my axes here, X, Y, and Z. So that's going to be the center position for my model when I bring it into Unreal. Now, I'd like my center position, my axes to actually be at the top of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my model piece down. It'd probably be better if I go into my viewports here to see this. I'm going to turn show grids on. Because while you can do it in your viewport here, it's probably easier to see your grids in the side and front viewports. So again, I'm selecting my object. I'm going to move it down so that the top of the object lays on that 0 position line through there. You see we've got these darker lines, which indicates our 0 position will be right in the middle. So I'm going to move it up until the top of the model lies on that black line. Doesn't have to be exact, but this piece I think will be easier to work with in Unreal if the axis isn't right in the middle of the object like that, but at the top. So we're okay on our X and Y, it was just in the Z I wanted to bring it down a bit. And that should place our axes right up here on the top piece in the middle, up there. As opposed to in the center of the object. So now that we've got our piece positioned, I'm going to export this so I can bring it into Substance Painter. So actually before I export it, I'm going to do an unwrap into Map Channel 2 because do I want to bake a texture down? No, we won't bake a texture down for this. but I still want to do an unwrap. Sniper Echo is saying if you want to preserve the object position in your scene, from max, you can import it. That's true. Now, you're exactly right. If you build something in max made of pieces and you put it all together in max as one object, but you're exporting each of those pieces into Unreal, and you want to import them and make sure that they all stay in that assortment for you, that's exactly right. You don't have to move your object to the middle, to the 000 world coordinates. But that's not, your axes are still going to be at 000 in Unreal, regardless of how you export it from max. People will say not to move it to 000 before you export to bring it into Unreal. If you have an object and you want to bring it into Unreal and have Unreal place all the pieces together for you, that's true. But the axis position, even in Unreal, is still going to be at 000. So if you build something in your 3D program made up of pieces that are all fit together, because like you shouldn't export one model complete like that to Unreal. You should export it as pieces so that you can put it together again in Unreal. You can certainly not move the pieces to the 0 position if you want to rebuild, if you want the program to put them all together automatically for you, because it will remember where they are in space in your 3D program, yeah. But your axis is still going to be over here. Where am I? Over here at 000. So while your model might be here, your axis in Unreal is still going to be over here. So that's true. If you want to rebuild it, you want the program to remember where in space it was, you don't have to move it. But the reason I want to move these pieces here to 000 world position is because I want to instance these pieces of geometry when I bring them into the Unreal Engine to rebuild the interior of the Art Deco building. So because I want to instance these pieces of geometry and use them multiple times in the building, remember, being an instance in the Unreal Engine means one object, this one piece of geometry will be loaded into memory in the game engine, and then you're instancing that, so you're making a copy of it. But as far as memory on your graphics card goes, there's still only one object in memory. So it uses very little extra memory every time you instance it. So it cuts down on the polygon count, and it also cuts down on the memory usage. Because you're really, as far as the graphics card knows, it's really only working with one version, just one object. You're just copying it around the level multiple times without using much more memory. So that's the reason I want these at 000, is because I want to instance them and move them around to different spots in the building. If I only used one of them like this and I put it in one spot in my building, I wouldn't necessarily have to worry about moving it to 000 because I wouldn't be moving it around. But because I do want to move it around, if my axis is 000 and my object is way off, it's going to make it very difficult for me to position it properly. My axis will be here, my object will be here, so I'm going to have to, it's going to be really awkward to try and position copies of them. That's the reason I move to 000. So just to be clear, Sniper Echo is exactly correct. If you're making an object made up of multiple pieces, you're fitting them all together in your 3D program, you don't have to move them. But if you're recreating something like this, where we're going to be making copies of it to put all around the inside of the building, which is what you should be doing to save on polygon counts and memory in a game engine, you want to make sure your axis is in a position on that model that will make it easy for you to move around once you get it in Unreal. And that's the reason I move it to 000. So again, if that's not clear, guys, or you're not sure about what I've just been rabbiting on about for the last 5 minutes, please ask questions in chat, but that's the reason I'm moving it and why I'm moving it. I'm going to turn off my seams here because I don't like seeing them. I'm going to open up my UVW editor. You can see my UVs here are a bit of a mess, which is hardly surprising when you look at the texture that's sitting on the object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a flatten mapping. I'll leave the default values. Just give Max a minute or two to work that out. Now you see that you wouldn't necessarily want to map that way if you're going to be texturing it up maybe in Photoshop or something, because working with all these tiny little UV islands is a pain in the ass. But because we're going to be using Substance Painter, or even if you're going to be using Mari, this would be fine. Paint your textures in. So because we're using a third-party 3D painting program, this is okay for us. But if you're painting it up in Photoshop, you wouldn't want to do that probably, because that'll be really difficult to work with. We're going to lose our texture assignment, but that's fine. We're going to be changing the texture anyway. So we have our UVs unwrapped into channel 1 just with a flatten mapping. I'm going to export this model piece. What do I call this? I'll call this wooden ceiling. Wooden ceiling. I'll call it arch. It's not really an arch, but that'll help me remember what exactly it's for. I'm going to export this piece as an FBX file. I'm going to go export selected because I have other objects in my scene. I don't want them all, I just want this piece. Let's put it in our exports folder here. So we're in Deco building exports painter. We'll just call it what I called it in Max, which was wooden ceiling arch. Now again, I'm using a preset here which is called UE4 Painter or Painter UE4. The only difference between this and whatever the default is for your FBX export is the fact that I've turned on Triangulate Mesh here.